Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Paul Looney. As many of you know, I'm a psychiatrist. Get lots of jokes about being the Looney doctor. I also work at Woodlands Church in the Woodlands, Texas, and I oversee counseling and recovery ministries there. But I have the privilege of working with Ivor Karabatkovic. I probably slaughtered your last name, sorry,
Got
but
it right.
Ivor is a ministry coordinator at the church, and he and I have had opportunities to interact on various occasions. And I have had the distinct privilege of hearing a bit of Ivor's story and found it to be fascinating, both in terms of his resilience in managing and navigating various challenges, but also in terms of what some people term third culture kids, people who have been transported from their culture of origin into other cultures. And I'd like to hear you, Ivor, share just a bit about your story, and we'll have some discussion about how you've been able to retain your sense of strength and resilience in spite of numerous challenges. So, with that, Ivor, you can share anything you'd like about yourself, where you are now, but also just about your underpinnings as a human growing up in the world.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Paul. It's an honor to be here. And my prayer for our conversation today is that God would just use it to speak to whoever's listening about um, the way He can write a beautiful story and make beauty from ashes. And it's just an honor to be here and to have this platform and to share a bit about myself. So I'm 33 years old, and I work in the missions department of Woodlands Church. And my wife and I moved here from Nashville, Tennessee in April of 2021. So I've been here in the Woodlands for almost 2 years now, a year and a half. And it's been such a blessing for us just to be here and to put some roots down and start a new life in Texas. So I grew up in Yugoslavia. So I was born in 1989 in Yugoslavia, right before the country broke up and there was a civil war that broke out. So that civil war is what pushed my family into a refugee status. We fled to Croatia when I was 3 years old.
Wow.
And we originally thought that we would just have to go for about a week or two, and there was going to be a peace treaty that was going to be signed. And so we went to Croatia to stay with my aunt, and 2 weeks turned into about 15 years before I could go back to visit.
Wow.
Dad, it took him
So I
27 years.
guess I guess y'all probably took almost nothing if you were expecting to come back in a couple of weeks.
That's right. So I was born in what's called a mixed family. My dad is Croatian, my mom is Serbian, and we lived in what is now Bosnia.
Okay.
And uh, in the context of the Civil War, it's the majority, the three sides that fought against each other. My dad was a public figure. He was a journalist, a Croatian journalist that would write about politics and people and humanity and right after actually we fled, uh, the Serbian army would come at our door and look for my dad and threaten to kill him basically and to do terrible things to my family because our childhood bedroom, remind you, I was 3 years old, was being used as a sniper vantage point.
Oh my
So
word.
we're spreading all sorts of lies about our family, and so we, had to flee. We were in danger. Even that journey to Croatia, at that point, barricades had started to go up, and they were recruiting men for the various armies. And so we were it was a bus full of families, and we took just two small suitcases, um, and we, didn't know. My parents didn't know if we would make it as a unit to Croatia.
Right.
My parents made a plan that if we were to get split up, I would go with my dad, and my older brother, would go with my mom.
Wow.
And by God's grace, I don't know how, other than by God's grace, we made it through all the barricades without being stopped or pulled off the bus,
Mm.
and we made it safely to Croatia. Um, And then from Croatia, my mom went first. She was actually labor trafficked into Germany. Um, and
Really?
yeah, so that was a really difficult thing for her to endure. Not only were we all separated from our mom, and she was separated from her husband and her children, she was in a very difficult situation. She was being taken advantage of, and the lady and her son who helped migrants, helped refugees from our country get into Germany and find work, would set up a bank account in her name, would set up, we had an apartment that we shared, that my mom shared with other refugee families. And so this lady would control all of her income, everything, couldn't make a phone call. It was all out of my mom's hands. And so
Wow.
so that was going on. And then
Mm.
um, also by the grace of God, one of the locals in Germany found out about this and offered some legal help pro bono, and was able to, my mom took the stand and was able to anonymously share her story and win the court case and win back all of the earnings that this lady had taken from her. And with that, it paved the way for my dad, my brother, and I to come to Germany.
Mm.
And at that time, it was right at the height of like the beginning of the war. So
Wow.
I don't remember how long we were separated, but I do remember that, and my mom has told me that it had a profound impact on my relationship with her. One that even to this day, as an adult, as a 33-year-old, we still have that dynamic, and some of that separation still
Mm.
creeps. So,
Sure.
yeah, but
Wow. What an interesting and a little bit terrifying
mm,
beginning to your life. Children, of course, even before the time we have memory, we are we are hit pretty hard by adversity and trauma. And I think that in some ways it can be more challenging to overcome trauma that we don't remember because
mm,
we don't have the words or the images to process what happened to us.
that's right.
So what was the earliest memories were they in Germany or somewhere
We're
else?
actually in Croatia. I remember, uh, oddly enough, I remember the street that my aunt lived on. And I didn't realize I remembered this until I went back in 2016 and I was standing in the same kind of corner of the street. And I remembered the fence and kind of there's a curve in the street. And I remember unlocking this memory of, wait a minute, I've been here before. And
Wow.
it was strange. Yeah. But that was, I would say, my earliest memory.
Gotcha. So when you think about your transition culturally, you made the transition initially to Croatia, then to Germany. What was your next transition after Germany?
Yeah, so in 1998, it was July 19th, the hardest day of my life. We had to pack up all of our things, and we boarded a plane from Frankfurt, Germany, uh, to uh, to Chicago, to O'Hare, and then to Cleveland, Ohio. It was from Germany to Cleveland, Ohio.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what led to that transition?
In 1997, the German government said that the war and the conflict in Bosnia is over. And so families can return. And the refugees that were in Germany were asked to go back or to go to a third country um, that would sponsor them. And so we couldn't go back because of the nature of the conflict
Yeah.
and my family's mixed identity and ethnicity. We were in danger of being persecuted
Yeah.
um, because of our faith and our ethnicity. Um, to this day, it's 2022 now. Schools, not all, but most schools are segregated in
Oh,
Bosnia based on nationality. And so, how
right.
do we, as half Croatian, half Serbian children that live in a predominantly Serbian uh, city, how do we fit in? Jobs are given based on nationality. All of these things are segregated, and we had no place. So it was actually, and given that my dad was also a public figure in a way and was a journalist and had this bounty on him. We couldn't go back. So we applied for a sponsorship and a refugee. We essentially applied for asylum in a way for actually it wasn't specifically asylum, but it was a refugee sponsorship through Catholic Charities, and so they
Oh,
sponsored us. And we came to Cleveland, Ohio, because other families in Germany that were from Bosnia that we knew, they had come to Cleveland. For the United States specifically, some key cities that sponsored and welcomed a lot of refugees from the Balkans are Atlanta, St. Louis, Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then Chicago and Cleveland as well, and New York. So, yeah.
well, I heard you say that that was the most difficult day
Mhm.
of your life. Is that still true for you at your age now, that looking back is still the most difficult thing that you've had to experience?
Yeah, I can say it is and it isn't. It is because it's certainly the biggest separation and biggest loss that I can remember. And some of that change, when we boarded that plane, we lost an entire world.
Mm, mm,
We lost a language, a culture. We lost family. We moved completely to the other side of the world
yeah,
from home,
right.
and so we lost future birthdays, future funerals. I've been to 2 funerals in my life, and none of them have been with family or for
Mm,
family members. So,
wow.
um, so these are things that you kind of the ambiguous things that you lose, when you leave a place, and so
Sure.
that loss continues to come up in different ways presently. Um, I've spent 3.5 years of very intense uh, therapy in Nashville.
Mm,
I entered into therapy and asked for help because I was working at a job that was very high stress,
yeah.
and I had found myself um, having panic attacks and being reminded of some of the things that I had faced in the past and gone through in the past, and I had no way of uh, handling them,
Yeah.
coping with,
Yeah.
regulating. They would blindside me,
Yeah.
uh, and I would curl up in a ball and I would cry like a baby.
Mm,
That was the only response that I had when I was reminded of some of that separation and loss. And the really the straw that broke the camel's back for me was I was watching a movie called Divergent, and
mm,
at the very beginning of the movie, they have these different tribes of people, and you have to pick which tribe you go to. The children do,
wow.
and that scene. It's very early on in the movie. It was very innocent. It wasn't actually very scary or anything like that. But something about that scene, um, something about having to choose to leave everything behind,
Mm,
leave your family behind, triggered me in a way uh,
yeah.
that I was not aware of, you know, and so that was really the moment. I remember my now wife, we were dating at the time. She just held me. We were watching the movie together, and she just held me and was present. She
Oh,
didn't calm me down or fix me or give me advice. She just was there with me, and that is exactly what I needed. And
yeah. Well,
um,
that's,
yeah, so
for
yeah.
me, Ivor, that is such a beautiful illustration of how our coping strategies, our defenses, can carry us through significant loss and grief and hardship.
Mm,
But while God gives us those emotional defenses or coping strategies to keep moving in the face of trauma, at some point He invites us to go back into that suffering. And what I've found is that it requires a certain level of emotional maturity, because at 3 or 10, or the younger ages that you were when things happened, you didn't have the emotional resources, but also you need a context of support and community. And your girlfriend, who's now your wife, beautifully understood that what you needed was a safe place to grieve, and to for her to have that instinct to simply hold you and let you cry and release some of those tears, some of which may have gone back to infancy, frankly, but
Mhm.
such a beautiful picture of what I believe will happen when we exit this planet, when we're finally in a safe enough space to cry all the tears, at which point God Himself will wipe all the tears from our eyes. But I just, I love that picture of y'all watching the movie Divergent and you being feeling moved by that trigger, but also feeling safe enough to release some of that pain.
Mm.
Such a beautiful thing.
Well, I can tell you that God has worked through uh, my marriage, through my wife, my partner in life. Uh, I have relearned, or for in some instances, learned for the first time what safe and deeply intimate and beautiful connection is with another human being that I've never had. I love my parents. My parents sacrificed everything for us,
Mm.
and I recognize that, and I honor that. At
Yeah.
the same time, my parents were going through a very difficult time themselves, and there's some negatives to that inadvertently, we've picked up on, my brother and I, for example. And it wasn't until Carolina, my wife, came into my life that I began to learn what healthy conflict looks like. I read recently that safety is not just the absence of conflict, which is how I've always viewed it,
Mm.
but it's also the presence of connection.
Yeah. Well, I think that in its best form, conflict actually is the stimulus for deeper connection. It's in those places where we rub each other the wrong way that the opportunity for deeper understanding and not only knowledge of the other person, but self-knowledge that you when you get triggered by conflict, it's God's way of highlighting or bringing to the surface something that is deep in us, a deep desire, a deep longing, a deep need, a passion. And when we're at odds with one another, again, it can be the invitation to intimacy. And it sounds like you and Carolina have found the secret sauce, the ability to to see conflict as something that's not um, always bad. In fact, maybe uh, if navigated well, the thing that will further and deepen your love and your journey.
Yeah, we're a work in progress, aren't we all? And am I thank God every day for her,
Nice.
because um, in many ways she's encouraged me to find help. She
Yeah.
has encouraged me to continue to ask tough questions and to better myself, to revisit the past, to find closure, and to acknowledge or accept the things that have changed over the course of my life that might no longer be. And she's given me the safety and the freedom um, to explore that and to cry when I need to cry, to take time to myself when I need time to myself to figure it out.
Mm.
And she's just been an encouragement and such a strong presence in my life where now I can say that that day was the strongest, the most negative and most impactful negatively, but also presently, right? Because I've stepped into it and I've been encouraged to explore it and wrestle with it. It's also been the most fruitful because
Wow.
ultimately, um, it's made me more meek. It's made me more compassionate towards others.
Mm.
It's made me more compassionate to my wife,
Yeah.
to my family, who's also going through similar things, and God can really. That's the way God equips us.
Yes.
That's those are the tools in our toolbox to further His kingdom.
Love it. Well, I can tell that we're going to need a follow-up conversation to talk more about how specifically being a third culture kid um, equips you in some profoundly good ways and also challenges you. But But let's for this podcast, I'd like to stay in a little bit longer in some of the things that you're highlighting as tools for transformation.
Hmm.
We talked about the gift of tears, that there are times when you need to release that suffering. And what I like to think, Ivor, is that tears keep the soil of our hearts soft so that life doesn't harden us and make us impervious to love or to connection. But you also mentioned solitude, or being able to withdraw. Jesus, we're told, frequently withdrew to lonely places. And I believe maybe more so for men, but for all of us, we need to be able to take a step back from our lives to be able to process our pain, to process our story, and to look thoughtfully at where we are, where we've been, and where we're headed.
Hmm.
But you also mentioned the compassion that we need both for those around us, but also toward our own soul. Because if you do not honor your own journey, your own story, and realize, yeah, this is tough, and have that simple sense of compassion for yourself and patience for the process, people get really stuck when they become judgy toward themselves, when they become self-critical or harsh, and don't give themselves the tender acceptance that we all need. And I believe having that from God really, is what allows us to have it for ourselves and then for other people.
Yeah.
I tend to think that the people that I love to be around the most are people who have suffered and who've come through it with with a resilience, a courage, and a compassion that allows them to be truly human.
Yeah.
What other observations do you have about what it's taken? You mentioned going through some therapy. You mentioned your connection with Carolina. Are there other elements of your journey that you think deserve to be highlighted in terms of transitioning through this journey from trauma to a life worth having? Any other elements of your story that you would like to highlight?
I think for me, what comes to mind in this moment is John 11:35, the shortest verse in the Bible, which is
Ah,
Jesus wept. And
yes.
it really sets the stage and gives us the permission that we need to grieve. And that's what grief needs, is permission to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be felt. When we sweep it under the rug, um, it can fester, and it can hurt, and it can continue to weigh us down in ways that keep us from walking in what God has for us in our full potential.
Mm,
Uh, because that's kind of what comes to mind. And in my own story, I think what I was longing for in that moment, when I described, I was sobbing and just really triggered, and that was a moment of deep, profound grief for me.
yeah.
Uh, and I'm somebody who has lived his life in the stage of denial.
Oh, yeah.
Denial is where I set a campsite, and that's where I live. And recently, we had moved from Nashville to Texas, and in Nashville, we went back last November for a wedding for a dear friend, and I had hoped to see. We had a couple days, and I'd hoped to see as many people as I could. It was our first time back in however many months, and I was so excited to see everybody that I missed. And I found myself not wanting to see anybody, actually. And I had this kind of contrast, and kind of this tension where I missed everybody terribly,
Yeah.
but I would make up all sorts of excuses and avoid the people that I loved, and just cherish so much. And it wasn't until we were sitting on the tarmac on our flight back to Houston that I realized I was grieving, and
Mm,
I was missing the people
mm,
that um, that I loved so dearly. And grief is if you think about it, when we sweep grief under the rug, we say, well, that didn't matter, right? Denial. It didn't matter. It didn't happen. It, you know, I've moved on, right? I'm in a new place. But as I was sitting on tarmac, I recognized for the first time really that not only have I been doing this presently, I've been so focused with setting up a life here in Texas, getting
Yeah.
to know my coworkers and new friends, finding a new rhythm and
Mm.
establishing ourselves. And I was so focused on that, which is part of resiliency, something that I know deeply and
Yeah.
comes very naturally to me because I've had to restart life so many times.
Right.
But on the tarmac, I was realizing that I had never acknowledged that I miss the people that I miss, and I love the people that I love. And grief is a reminder
Mm.
that we've lost something that was very precious to us,
Mm.
that actually
Mm.
mattered a whole lot. And so denial, when you sweep it under the rug, um, you're not facing that reality that wait a
Yeah.
minute, I just lost something so profound and deep because my relationships in Nashville really did matter to me and do, um, but I wasn't wanting to face the people that I now miss because
Yeah.
it's just a reminder of, hey, these things hurt. There are
Wow.
some times where we lose things even in good transitions, right? So when a person gets married,
Yeah.
you can grieve and lose singleness and some of that freedom or some of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And it can blindside couples,
Hmm. Yeah.
uh, and so on the surface, it might look like denial or anger or depression or all of these other things, but this person is actually grieving their loss of um, a sense of freedom, right?
Yeah.
Marriage is beautiful and but there's a change there,
Yeah.
and to acknowledge that, hey, this change actually mattered, to me, and I'm grieving it now.
Yeah.
You cannot move forward in the thing that you are now in. So whether it's marriage and togetherness, then
Yeah.
Uh, so
Well,
so those are some of the things that when I look back at even recently, I'm learning that uh, I've lived most of my life in denial.
yeah.
That's been
You
the easiest way to cope with the loss and the pain of that loss.
I think that your experience will resonate with many people who are listening because I do think that the quickest way to escape pain is to go to denial, to minimize it, to avoid it, to push
Mhm.
it under the rug, put it in the closet. And it works for a time.
For time. Yeah.
But as you're so beautifully pointing out, if you want to move into the next phase, the new chapter, you have to do it well. You have to recognize that every transition requires setting aside something in order to embrace something new. I was
Yes.
thinking about Jesus saying, you cannot build, it's not a good idea to start building a tower without counting the cost. And of course,
Mhm.
you're going to have to let go of some money to build the tower. In this case, to establish the one flesh relationship with Carolina, you are of necessity letting go of some of the pleasures and the simplicity of the single life. And to do that well, you have to grieve. You have to acknowledge, yeah, this is hard, and I'm willing to do it. I love that God sent Ananias to the Apostle Paul to show him what he would have to suffer in order to get on that path um, of blessing that Paul undoubtedly experienced through his ministry. But Jesus wanted him to know this is going to cost you, and I deeply appreciate how you're asking all of our listeners to step away from denial, that in order to enjoy and extract all the value from what God is calling you to, you must grieve well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the most vulnerable and scariest thing.
Yeah, it is.
It is. I'm a people pleaser, can be, and I focus on other people's needs. And because of my experience, right, I look around the room and I can sense and see if something is off. And that's a survival, tactic that you learn,
Right.
especially in difficult times. And and so for me, I know that just the acknowledgement of, hey, I feel this,
Yeah.
is a huge step, because it's so much easier to just not be in tune. And what led me down this journey really, especially learning about third culture kids and cross-cultural kids, which includes refugees and immigrants like me, because there's an element of trauma there that third culture kids might not have, but
Oh,
cross-cultural kids do. So
for
it takes
sure.
into account, the model now takes into account those experiences. Was this question of who am I and where do I belong?
Hmm. Yeah.
And at 33 or 32, my dog is whining, so I apologize. But at 32, I couldn't tell you who I am and where I belong. I'd never felt at home
Yeah.
anywhere. And because I was trying to attach home to a place.
Mm.
And home was actually, to me, I would describe home as a relationship. I would describe it as my relationship with my wife, but I would also describe it as a relationship to uh, my God, my Creator.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
Hebrews 11, I remember in a previous conversation, you and I talked about, the heavenly city.
Mm.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because when I went back to Bosnia on a mission trip, the first sermon that I preached was Hebrews 11, because
Wow.
I longed for a country where some of the pain and the grief of uh, the war and the separation, of a people, of a country, where now there's prejudice and hatred and disconnection,
Yeah.
when there used to be connection and brother and sisterhood, and I longed for a place where I could belong, but
Mm.
where we all could belong again.
Mm.
And so I preached on Hebrews 11, because when I gave my life to Christ, when I said, yes, I believe and I profess that Jesus is Lord over my life, um, I gained citizenship that does not perish.
Oh, yeah.
Yugoslavia as a country existed and now exists in spirit, but doesn't exist on the map.
Wow.
There will come a day where the countries of the world will not exist anymore.
Right.
And
Yeah.
countries as we know it will not be the way they are.
So
But
beautiful.
the kingdom of heaven is eternal. And so I had punched my ticket, right? I had gained that citizenship that will not perish. And
So
so,
beautiful.
yeah, so I have an eternal peace, because I get to say I'm a citizen of heaven. I'm a child of God.
Mm.
And
That makes me so happy, Ivor. And I do think that there's something about coming to terms with our broken humanity that is what urges us to abandon in some ways our quest for significance and security in this worldly system and in our human identity, and makes us call out for that citizenship in heaven and our life with God.
mm,
I don't think I ever until this conversation, Igor, thought about how amazing it is that Jesus says that the Father and He will come and make their home in our hearts. Like you were talking about the place to call home, and how unbelievable that
mm,
the God of the universe would call this place in here in my heart and yours, that He would call that His home. Like, wow,
yeah,
that's
dwells in us. Yeah.
unbelievable. But
And yeah,
what'd you
that's
say?
that he dwells in us. He's yeah, and that's a miraculous, amazing thing.
It really is. Well, I'm so grateful. I really want to have a follow-up conversation to delve a little deeper into the cross-cultural and third cultural kid idea, or the concept, and how it plays itself out in
Mhm.
yourself and people that have had similar experiences. Is there anything else you want to say in this segment before we end our time?
Oh, I don't know, but I think my dog does, because she just climbed up here. She is.
That's
Sorry.
awesome.
Off the couch. There we go.
Speaking,
Good.
speaking of belonging
Yes.
and
Very
finding
good.
your
Okay.
identity in a
Yeah,
relationship, your home and relationship, that your doggy's right there with you.
she sensed she's not allowed to be on the couch, so she sensed the opportunity. Joanna, if you're watching this, I got her off the couch. Don't worry.
Love it. Love it.
No,
Well,
it's just an honor to get to talk with you and to share a part of my story. And yeah, like I said, I hope that it brings a healing and comfort to others who are watching and listening, and and it sparks a sense of curiosity in them to ask. I know for me, it was those two questions of who am I and where I belong. Um, that led to Googling that question and
Mm.
saying, why do I not know what home is?
Wow.
And that led me to third culture kids and then cross-cultural kids. So or cross-culture kids. So yeah, I think, and even further back when I went into therapy, it was uh, why can't I um, handle this, or why can't I cope with this trigger, and and then just continuing to ask the question why, because usually there's a pattern of behavior, there's a survival tactic there that we learned a long time ago that we're probably subconsciously repeating without even knowing it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You
Yeah.
know, when Jesus wept, of course, it was in the context of the loss of his dear friend,
Yeah.
that Mary and Martha were deeply upset because their brother Lazarus had died and that Jesus had not been there
Hmm.
to heal him. And, I've often thought, well, isn't it interesting that Jesus wept, even though he knew he had the power and probably knew that he was going to call Lazarus back to life again? And it strikes me in our conversation today that when God invites us into relationship with him or invites us to this life of faith, or when you invited Carolina to engage the life as your wife, that invitation to intimacy and to life is also an invitation to some degree to suffering. When
Mm.
she held you that night, she opened her heart to your grief as well as her own in seeing the one that she loved so deeply hurting. And how beautiful that God, in the form of Jesus, was able to feel his own pain, but also perhaps feel even the tears that came to mind when he realized that calling Lazarus back from the tomb into relationship with life again was a calling back into a life of being a pilgrim and a life of struggle and suffering that nevertheless is well worth the pain. So
Mm.
thank you so much, Ivor. I look forward to talking with you more. God bless you, and thanks all of you for tuning in. I love you.
All righty.
Bye bye, Ivor.
Mhm.